The blazing Arizona sun baked the dusty trail as Nora Fletcher clutched the leather strap hanging from the stagecoach ceiling, her knuckles white with tension. She had been traveling for 3 days straight, her journey from Boston to Tucson stretching longer than expected, and now this God-forsaken heat was making her light-headed. The stagecoach jostled violently over the rugged terrain, sending her hat pin digging painfully into her scalp. "Not much longer now, madam," the driver called down. "Should be reaching Willow Creek by sundown if the weather holds." Nora nodded, though no one could see her. She was alone in the coach save for a snoring elderly businessman who had boarded at the last stop. Her thoughts drifted to her uncle's letter, his failing health, the inheritance of his small ranch just outside Tucson, the opportunity for a new beginning. At 23, after losing both parents to influenza last winter, she had nothing keeping her in Boston. Teaching at the girls' school had been fulfilling, but the memories haunting every street corner of her hometown had become unbearable. A deafening crack shattered her reverie, followed by a violent lurch that sent her flying across the cabin. The businessman jerked awake with a shout as the stagecoach tilted precariously to one side before grinding to a halt. "Sweet Jesus," the driver cursed. "Everybody all right down there?" Nora pushed herself up from the floor, wincing at the bruise forming on her elbow. "We're unharmed," she called back, straightening her skirts. "What's happened?" "Wheels gone and snapped. Must have hit that last boulder harder than I thought." The businessman muttered profanities under his breath as he adjusted his spectacles. "How long will repairs take?" "I've an important meeting in Tucson tomorrow." The driver didn't answer immediately. Nora heard muffled voices outside the driver conferring with the shotgun messenger who rode beside him. After a moment, the stagecoach door swung open, revealing the weathered face of the shotgun messenger. "Apologies for the inconvenience," he said, tipping his hat. "Wheels busted clean through. Driver's gone ahead to flag down help. We're only about 5 miles from Willow Creek, but it might be a spell before we get moving again." 5 miles, the businessman sputtered. "In this heat, impossible." Nora gathered her resolve. Surely someone will come along soon. No sooner had she spoken than the thunder of hoofbeats approached from behind. The shotgun messenger's hand instinctively moved to his rifle, but relaxed as a lone rider came into view. The horseman slowed his palomino to a walk, dust billowing around man and beast as they approached. Nora couldn't help but notice his broad shoulders beneath a faded blue shirt, the set of his jaw partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that seemed to assess the situation in seconds. "Trouble," the stranger called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Wheels snapped clean off," the messenger explained, gesturing to the damaged coach. "Got passengers needin' to reach Willow Creek." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. He approached the damaged wheel, crouching to inspect it with practiced eyes. "Name's Grant Ramirez," he said, glancing up at Nora, who had stepped out of the coach for fresh air. "I've got the tools to fix this if you're willing to wait. How long will it take?" The businessman demanded, his face flushed red from heat and irritation. Grant examined the broken wheel, running calloused fingers along the fractured wood. "The axle's still good. I can jury-rig something that'll get you to town if you give me a few hours." "Hours," the businessman sputtered. "In this God-forsaken heat," Grant turned his attention to Nora, who was doing her best to appear composed despite her disheveled appearance. "Stay still, I'll fix it before dark," he said with a certainty that Nora found oddly comforting. "There's shade by those rocks over yonder if you'd prefer to wait there, madam." The businessman huffed, declaring he would walk to town rather than waste precious time. The shotgun messenger tried to dissuade him, mentioning bandits and the unforgiving terrain, but the man was adamant. After extracting a promise that his luggage would follow on the repaired coach, he set off down the trail with only a canteen and his walking stick. "Fool," muttered the messenger, shaking his head. "Barely knows which end of a gun to hold." Grant seemed unconcerned, already rummaging through his saddlebags for tools. "Won't make it 3 miles in this heat dressed like that." Nora hesitated, unsure whether to follow the businessman or remain with the coach. "I'd stay put if I were you, miss," Grant said, glancing up from his work. "Might get this fixed sooner than expected if luck's on our side." The messenger nodded in agreement. "Mr. Ramirez here's got a reputation for fixing near anything. Used to be a blacksmith before taking to the trail." Nora made her decision, retrieving her parasol from the coach and finding a spot in the shadow of a large boulder. The messenger introduced himself as Tom before climbing atop the coach to keep watch, leaving Nora alone with her thoughts and the rhythmic sounds of Grant working on the wheel. She observed him surreptitiously as he worked, noting the practiced efficiency of his movements. He had removed his vest in the heat, and his shirt clung to his back with sweat as he wrestled with the damaged parts. "May I ask what brings you to Arizona territory, miss?" Grant broke the silence without looking up from his work. "Fletcher, Nora Fletcher," she replied, surprised by his attempt at conversation. "My uncle passed recently. I'm to inherit his ranch outside Tucson," Grant nodded, reaching for another tool. "Samuel Fletcher's place." Nora straightened with surprise. "You knew my uncle?" "Everyone round these parts knew Sam Fletcher," Grant replied with a small smile. "Good man, fair to his workers. Sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Nora said quietly. "Did you know him well?" Grant paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow with his forearm. "Helped him break a few horses last spring. He spoke of a niece back east, a teacher," he said. Nora felt a lump form in her throat. "Yes, I taught at a girls' school in Boston." "Long way from Boston to Tucson," Grant observed. "Yes," Nora agreed softly. "A very long way indeed." As the afternoon wore on, Grant continued his repairs while Nora shared hesitant details about her life in Boston. In turn, he offered sparse but illuminating glimpses into his own history, born in Santa Fe to a Mexican mother and American father, apprenticed to a blacksmith at 12, and now at 30, working as a horse trainer and occasional guide. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon when Grant finally stepped back from the coach, wiping his hands on a rag. "It'll hold to Willow Creek," he announced, "but you'll need a proper replacement before continuing to Tucson." Tom climbed down from his perch, inspecting Grant's handiwork with an appreciative whistle. "Fine job. Driver should be back any minute with help, though looks like we won't be needin' it after all." As if summoned by Tom's words, the stagecoach driver appeared around a bend in the trail, leading his horse and looking exhausted from his trek. "Found help coming?" he called out, then stopped short upon seeing the repaired wheel. "Well, I'll be." Grant replaced his hat, shielding his eyes from the lowering sun. "Should get going if you want to reach town before dark." The driver nodded gratefully, hurrying to check the repair himself before taking his position. Tom helped Nora back into the coach, handling her as carefully as fine china. Grant was already mounting his horse when Nora leaned out the window. "Mr. Ramirez," she called, "we haven't paid you for your assistance." He touched the brim of his hat, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "No payment necessary, Miss Fletcher, just doing what needed doing." "At least let us buy you supper at Willow Creek," she persisted, surprising herself with the boldness of her invitation. "That's mighty kind," Grant replied after a moment's consideration. "I suppose I could use a hot meal." The driver cracked his whip, and the stagecoach lurched forward, the repaired wheel holding steady. Grant followed alongside, occasionally scanning the horizon with the watchful gaze of a man accustomed to trouble. They reached Willow Creek as the last rays of sunlight painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The small settlement consisted of a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and at the far end, a modest two-story structure with Willow Creek Hotel painted in fading letters across its facade. The stagecoach pulled to a stop outside the hotel. Grant dismounted and helped Nora down, her gloved hand lingering in his calloused palm for a moment longer than necessary. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her arm, and she quickly withdrew, fussing with her skirts to hide her confusion. "Our businessman friend seems to have made it after all," Grant observed, nodding toward a figure collapsed in a chair on the hotel porch, looking thoroughly exhausted. Nora couldn't help but smile. "Perhaps next time he'll heed advice from those who know the territory better." The hotel proprietress, Mrs. Hawkins, A stout woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner informed Nora that the next coach to Tucson wouldn't depart for 3 days due to the wheel damage. Nora resigned herself to the delay, securing a room upstairs while Grant saw to his horse at the livery stable. True to her word, Nora waited for Grant in the small dining room attached to the hotel. When he appeared in the doorway, she was struck by the transformation. He'd clearly visited the barber, his face now clean-shaven, hair trimmed, and wearing a fresh shirt beneath his vest. "Miss Fletcher," he said, approaching her table with that same measured confidence, "you look refreshed after your journey." Nora had indeed taken advantage of the hotel's basin and pitcher to wash away the dust of travel. She'd changed into a simpler blue dress, her dark blonde hair neatly pinned at the nape of her neck. "As do you, Mr. Ramirez," she replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I feared you might not come." "A promise is a promise," Grant said simply, taking his seat. Conversation flowed more easily over their meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Grant inquired about her plans for the ranch, listening intently as she confessed her limited knowledge of ranching. Uncle Samuel wrote that the foreman, Mr. Holloway, would continue managing the day-to-day operations, she explained. "I'm afraid my expertise with horses extends only to riding side saddle through Boston Common on Sundays." Grant's laugh was unexpected, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his face completely. "Somehow I think you're capable of more than you give yourself credit for, Miss Fletcher." The compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. "You're very kind, Mr. Ramirez." "Not kindness," he corrected gently. "Just observation. Your uncle mentioned you had spirit, said you reminded him of your mother, his sister." Nora's eyes widened. "He spoke of my mother," Grant nodded, his expression softening. "Said she was the bravest person he knew, moving east against family wishes to pursue education." Tears threatened at the corners of Nora's eyes. She blinked them back, touched that her uncle had spoken of her mother with such admiration. They had corresponded regularly, but she hadn't seen him since childhood. Their conversation continued long after their plates were cleared, shifting from family histories to books they'd read, to Grant's travels across the territory. He possessed a quiet intelligence that surprised her, speaking knowledgeably about topics from horse breeding to poetry. Emily Dickinson. Nora asked incredulously when he quoted several lines. Grant smiled, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. "My father believed education shouldn't end with schooling. He had books shipped from back east, made me read one every month, no matter where we were living." As the evening progressed, Nora found herself increasingly drawn to this contradictory man, rough-hewn yet thoughtful, capable in the wilderness yet conversant in literature. When Mrs. Hawkins finally shooed them out so she could close the dining room, both seemed reluctant for the evening to end. Grant walked Nora to the foot of the hotel stairs, maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless felt too far to Nora's suddenly confused senses. "Will you be staying in Willow Creek long?" she asked, hoping her voice sounded casual. "A day or two," he replied. "Need to deliver a message to the sheriff here before heading south." "South, toward Tucson, perhaps?" The question escaped before she could consider its impropriety. Grant studied her face in the lamplight. "It could be on my route," he said carefully. "I would feel safer traveling with someone familiar with the territory," Nora said, her heartbeat quickening at her own boldness. Something flickered in Grant's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or caution. "The stagecoach is secure enough, Miss Fletcher. The driver and Tom know what they're doing." "Of course," Nora said quickly, embarrassed by her transparent attempt. "I didn't mean to presume upon our brief acquaintance." Grant's expression softened. "No presumption taken, Miss Fletcher. I'm honored by your trust." He hesitated, then added, "I'll inquire about the coach schedule in the morning. Perhaps our paths will align naturally." With that ambiguous statement, he bid her good night, leaving Nora standing at the base of the stairs, wondering what had possessed her to be so forward with a man she'd known less than a day. The next morning brought no sign of Grant in the hotel dining room. Nora ate breakfast alone, trying to ignore her disappointment. She spent the morning writing letters to her former headmistress in Boston, to her aunt in Philadelphia, to Mr. Holloway at the ranch, updating them on her journey and expected arrival. Shortly before noon, a commotion in the street drew her to the window. 3 riders had galloped into town, their horses lathered and breathing hard. One man slumped in his saddle, clearly injured. As she watched, Grant appeared from the direction of the sheriff's office, hurrying to help the wounded man dismount. Curiosity and concern propelled Nora downstairs and outside, where a small crowd had gathered. She caught fragments of urgent conversation ambushed on the South Road. At least 6 of them. Took the payroll. Shot Jenkins dead on the spot. Grant looked up, catching sight of Nora on the boardwalk. His expression hardened as he guided the wounded man toward the doctor's office. He detoured briefly to her side. Stage to Tucson is delayed indefinitely, he said in a low voice. Road gang hit the southbound coach this morning. Stay in town until things settle. Was anyone killed? Nora asked, alarmed. Driver and 1 passenger, Grant confirmed grimly. These men barely escaped. Before she could ask more questions, Grant was called away by the sheriff. Nora watched him go, noting the easy authority with which he moved, the deference shown to him by the other men. There was clearly more to Grant Ramirez than a wandering horseman who happened upon their broken coach. Throughout the day, Willow Creek buzzed with rumors about the attack. By evening, Nora learned that a posse was forming to pursue the road gang, a notorious group led by a man called Scorpion, responsible for a string of robberies across the territory. At supper, Grant finally appeared, looking tired but determined. He slid into the chair across from Nora without waiting for an invitation. "I'm riding out with the posse at first light," he said without preamble. "Those men need to be brought to justice before they hit another coach." "You're not just a horse trainer, are you?" Nora asked directly. Grant hesitated, then sighed. "I do train horses, that's truth enough, but I also work with the territorial marshals sometimes, tracking men who need finding." "You're a bounty hunter," Nora whispered. "I prefer scout," Grant replied with a ghost of a smile. "I know the land, the hiding places. I can track most anything that leaves a trace." Nora absorbed this information, studying the man across from her. "Is it dangerous? Pursuing these men?" "It can be," Grant acknowledged, "but necessary. The territory can't develop without safe passage." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Nora spoke again. "How long will you be gone?" "Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks." He met her gaze directly. "Your ranch will still be there when you arrive, Miss Fletcher. Mr. Holloway is capable. Don't risk traveling until we've handled this situation." The concern in his voice touched her. "I'll wait," she promised. After they finished eating, Grant walked Nora outside. The evening air had cooled significantly, and stars blazed overhead in a way Nora had never witnessed in Boston. "I've never seen so many stars," she murmured, tilting her head back to take in the magnificent display. Grant stood beside her, his own gaze lifting skyward. "Out here, with nothing between you and heaven, you see things differently." The simple observation resonated deeply with Nora. She had indeed begun to see things differently since stepping off the train in Santa Fe a week earlier. The vast landscapes, the raw beauty, the direct manner of the people, it all stripped away the artifice she'd grown accustomed to in Boston society. "Will you be careful?" she asked softly. "When you're tracking these men," Grant looked down at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I'm always careful, Miss Fletcher." "Nora," she corrected. "Please call me Nora." A moment passed between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. "Nora," he repeated, his voice dropping slightly. "I'll be careful." Before she could lose her nerve, Nora reached into her pocket and withdrew a small handkerchief embroidered with her initials. "For luck," she said, pressing it into his palm. Grant's fingers closed around the delicate fabric, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'll return it when I come back," he promised. "See that you do, Mr. Ramirez." "Grant," he corrected with the hint of a smile, "if I'm to call you Nora." "Grant," she echoed, enjoying the sound of his name on her lips. He departed at dawn the next morning with the sheriff and 4 other men. Nora watched from her window as they rode out, Grant's straight-backed figure easily identifiable among the group. He didn't look back, and she told herself it was foolish to feel disappointment at that. Days passed slowly in Willow Creek. Nora filled her time by helping Mrs. Hawkins with mending, writing in her journal and reading whatever books she could find in the small settlement. She befriended Sarah, the young woman who worked at the general store, and through her learned more about life in the territory. Grant Ramirez has quite a reputation, Sarah mentioned casually one afternoon as they sorted fabric. They say he's tracked men clear across the border and back. Is he good at what he does? Nora tried to sound merely curious. Sarah nodded emphatically. One of the best. My brother rode with him once when they were after cattle rustlers, said Grant could read sign like an Apache and never seemed to sleep. She paused, giving Nora a knowing look. Also said he never pays mind to the girls who flutter their eyelashes at him when he comes to town. Nora felt her cheeks warm. I hardly think, I didn't mean anything by it, Sarah hastened to add. Just that he's particular is all, keeps to himself mostly. This information settled in Nora's mind, adding another layer to her growing impression of Grant. She wondered what had prompted him to be so forthcoming with her that first evening over supper. A week after the posse's departure, a lone rider galloped into town with news the road gang had been cornered in an abandoned mining camp 30 miles south. 2 of the outlaws were dead, 1 captured, but Scorpion and 2 others had escaped. The posse had split up, with Grant and the sheriff continuing the pursuit while the others brought back the captured man. Nora's relief at knowing Grant was alive mingled with concern that he was still in danger, pushing deeper into outlaw territory. Another week crawled by. The Stagecoach line resumed operations, though with armed escorts now riding alongside. Nora could have continued her journey to Tucson but found herself reluctant to leave without knowing Grant's fate. You waiting on something particular, Miss Fletcher? Mrs. Hawkins asked pointedly one morning as Nora gazed out the window for the 100th time. Just enjoying the view, Nora replied unconvincingly. Mrs. Hawkins made a skeptical sound in her throat. Been running this hotel 15 years. Know when someone's heart is elsewhere. She patted Nora's shoulder. He'll be back. Grant Ramirez always comes back. On the 17th day after the posse's departure, as Nora was helping in the hotel kitchen, a commotion erupted outside. She hurried to the door, heart in her throat, to see 3 dust-covered riders coming slowly down the main street. The sheriff rode in front, followed by a man with bound hands, presumably Scorpion himself. Grant brought up the rear, his posture betraying exhaustion even from a distance. Relief flooded through Nora at the sight of him, whole and alive. The small crowd that had gathered parted to let the riders through to the jail. Nora remained on the hotel porch, suddenly uncertain. What if the connection she'd felt had been merely a product of circumstances, her vulnerability on the trail, his gallantry in helping? What if, now that his mission was complete, he had no interest in renewing their acquaintance? She didn't have long to wonder. After delivering the prisoner, Grant emerged from the jail and headed directly toward the hotel, his stride purposeful despite his obvious fatigue. He stopped at the base of the steps, looking up at her with those intense eyes. You're still here, he said simply. Nora nodded, unable to form words past the lump in her throat. Grant climbed the steps slowly, never breaking eye contact. When he reached her, he pulled something from his pocket, her handkerchief, now stained with dust and what looked suspiciously like blood. I promised to return this, he said, his voice rough from days of trail dust. Nora shook her head. Keep it. You might need luck again someday. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. What I need right now is a bath, a meal, and, he hesitated, then continued more quietly, and to know if you do me the honor of dining with me again tonight. Yes, Nora replied without hesitation, though I can't imagine you'll have much appetite after trail rations. You'd be surprised what a man can develop an appetite for, Grant said with sudden intensity that made Nora's pulse quicken. That evening, over a hearty meal in the hotel dining room, Grant recounted the pursuit in measured terms, careful to spare her the worst details. He'd taken a bullet graze to his arm, he admitted when she noticed him favoring it, but the wound was clean and healing well. The territorial governor has asked me to escort a shipment of gold from the mines to Tucson next week, Grant mentioned as they lingered over coffee. More dangerous work, Nora observed, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. Safer than hunting scorpion, Grant countered, and it would take me in the direction of your uncle's ranch. He hesitated, then added carefully, I could see you safely there if you'd like. The regular stage will be running again, but after what happened. Yes, Nora said, perhaps too quickly. I'd appreciate the escort. Over the next few days, as Grant recovered his strength and made preparations for the journey, he and Nora spent increasing amounts of time together. They rode out one morning to a nearby creek, where Grant patiently began teaching Nora to ride astride rather than side-saddle, a skill she would need on her ranch. It's not proper, she protested weakly, even as she adjusted to the unfamiliar position. Proper won't help you mend fences or drive cattle, Grant pointed out. Out here, practical trumps proper every time. Nora found she enjoyed the freedom of riding astride, the connection with the horse beneath her more direct and intuitive. She enjoyed even more the careful way Grant's hands steadied her when she first mounted, the pride in his eyes when she cantered in a smooth circle around the meadow. On the evening before their departure for Tucson, Grant took Nora to dinner at Willow Creek's only restaurant a step up from the hotel dining room, with actual tablecloths and a man playing violin in the corner. A proper farewell to Willow Creek, Grant explained as he pulled out her chair. It's hardly been the visit I expected when the stagecoach wheel broke, Nora mused, smoothing her best dress, the green silk she'd planned to wear upon meeting her uncle's lawyer in Tucson. Regrets? Grant asked, watching her closely. Nora met his gaze steadily. Not a single one. Something shifted in Grant's expression. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Nora, there's something I need to tell you before we continue to Tucson. Her heart stuttered at his serious tone. What is it? Your uncle's ranch, Fletcher's Rest, borders my own property to the south. At her startled expression, he continued quickly. I didn't mention it that first night because I wasn't sure of your intentions, whether you planned to sell or stay. You're my neighbor, Nora asked, trying to process this revelation. Grant nodded. Your uncle and I had an arrangement about water rights and grazing. He was fair, as I said. I hoped his successor would be the same, but I didn't want to presume. Why tell me now? Because, Grant said slowly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, my feelings for you have grown beyond mere neighborly concern, and I wouldn't have you think I had ulterior motives for helping you reach your property. Nora's breath caught at his directness. Your feelings. Grant's eyes never wavered from hers. I've known many women in my 30 years, Nora Fletcher, but never one who made me reconsider my solitary ways until now. And what ways would those be? She asked softly. The ones that keep me moving, never settling, taking whatever work comes along. His voice dropped lower. The ones that made sense until a stagecoach wheel snapped on the road to Willow Creek. Nora turned her hand beneath his, their palms now pressed together. And what are you considering now? The possibility of more permanent arrangements, Grant said carefully. Not immediately, you'll need time to learn your ranch, to be sure this life suits you, but perhaps in time if you find your feelings align with mine. Joy bubbled up in Nora's chest, unexpected and overwhelming. I think we may find our feelings are already quite well aligned, Mr. Ramirez. The journey to Tucson took 4 days, traveling at a leisurely pace that allowed Nora to acclimatize to the longer hours in the saddle. They were accompanied by 2 other guards for the gold shipment, but the men kept a respectful distance, giving Grant and Nora privacy for conversation. Grant used the time to educate Nora about ranching cattle breeds, seasonal concerns, water management in the arid climate. She absorbed it all eagerly, her natural intelligence making her a quick study. In turn, she shared more about her life in Boston, her teaching experiences, her dreams of someday writing a novel. There are stories here worth telling, Grant observed as they made camp on the 3rd night. The territory is changing, the old ways meeting the new. Someone ought to record it before it's gone. Perhaps I will, Nora mused, watching the firelight play across his features. Once I've experienced enough to write with authority. I have no doubt you'll succeed at whatever you set your mind to, Grant said, his faith in her abilities warming her more than the campfire. They reached Fletcher's Rest on a golden afternoon, the ranch buildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. Mr. Holloway, a weather-beaten man in his 50s, greeted Nora with gruff respect, clearly reserving judgment until he'd determined her mettle. "Your uncle spoke highly of you, Miss Fletcher," he said, helping her down from her horse. "Said you had his sister's spirit and your father's head for business." Nora blinked back unexpected tears. "I hope to prove worthy of his faith in me, Mr. Holloway." Grant hung back during these initial introductions, but Holloway spotted him and broke into a rare smile. "Ramirez. Didn't expect to see you escorting our new boss lady." "Helping a neighbor in need," Grant replied evenly, though his eyes met Nora's with warmth that belied the casual statement. Over the weeks that followed, Nora threw herself into learning every aspect of ranch operations. She rose before dawn, rode out with the hands, studied the ledgers at night, and asked endless questions that impressed even the most skeptical workers. Grant visited frequently, ostensibly to discuss water rights and boundary issues, though no one was fooled by the pretense. On a crisp October evening 6 months after her arrival, Grant appeared at her door with an unusual request. "Ride with me," he said, offering no explanation. Intrigued, Nora fetched her shawl and followed him to where 2 horses waited. They rode in companionable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the landscape in brilliant oranges and purples. Grant led her to a ridge overlooking both their properties, the cattle grazing peacefully, the ranch buildings in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys against the backdrop of mountains. "I found this spot my first week here," Grant said as they dismounted. "Whenever decisions weigh heavy, I come here for clarity." Nora drank in the view. "It's beautiful." "As are you," Grant said, turning to face her directly. "More beautiful with each passing day as you grow into this life, this land." His directness still had the power to steal her breath. "Grant, I've watched you these past months," he continued, taking her hands in his. "Seen you transform from a Boston teacher to a capable rancher without losing an ounce of your compassion or dignity. I've never admired anyone more." Nora's heart pounded as Grant lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "I'm not a man of many possessions, Nora Fletcher. My ranch is modest compared to yours. But I can promise you this: every sunrise we'd share would be greeted with gratitude, every challenge faced together, every joy multiplied because it's shared with you." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled onto Nora's cheeks as happiness bubbled up from her core. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Grant Ramirez, I will marry you." He rose in one fluid motion, gathering her into his arms with a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley. Their lips met in a kiss that had been building since that first day on the dusty trail, tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. 3 weeks later, they were married in Tucson's small church, with Mr. Holloway giving the bride away and Sarah from Willow Creek serving as maid of honor. The territorial governor himself attended, along with ranchers from miles around who had come to respect the formidable partnership forming between Fletcher's Rest and Ramirez Range. That evening, as they stood on the porch of what was now their shared home, watching the first stars appear in the deepening blue sky, Grant wrapped his arm around Nora's waist. "Imagine if that wheel hadn't snapped," he mused, pressing a kiss to her temple. Nora leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," she replied with certainty. "Some things are simply meant to be," Grant smiled, turning her to face him, "like a Boston schoolteacher and a Southwestern scout." "Exactly like that," Nora agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss her husband as the desert night enfolded them in its vast, star-studded embrace. In the years that followed, Fletcher Ramirez became one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory, known for fair business practices and innovation. Nora did indeed write her novel, the first of many drawing on the rich tapestry of territorial life. Their children grew up straddling 2 worlds, educated with books from the East but wise in the ways of the West, much like their father. And every year on the anniversary of their first meeting, Grant and Nora would ride out alone to that same spot where he'd proposed, watching the sun set over their shared domain, marveling at how a broken wheel on a dusty trail had led them to a life neither could have imagined, but both had come to treasure beyond measure.